Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank my colleagues. Mr. President, I rise to discuss the tax proposal before us. We are at a critical moment. Our economy is slowly climbing from the depths of a deep recession, but without additional support, it could easily backslide, and we can't afford to let that happen. There are still too many Americans, 15 million, who desperately want the opportunity to work, but can't find a job in this difficult environment. My top priority is jobs, creating jobs, and sustaining demand to continue to grow jobs in this country. I have serious concerns about several provisions of this bill that will not help us accomplish that goal of creating and sustaining jobs. But I will support this package because right now, back in my home state of Rhode Island, there are approximately 65,000 men and women from all walks of life who are unemployed and need this bill. Many of them are individuals in the middle of their careers who have worked since they were 18 or 21, continuously, productively, and now they find themselves for the first time in their life without any job, and if we do not act, without the means to support their family and provide for their children. This bill preserves emergency unemployment insurance to help these individuals make ends meet, help them to hold their families together. It will help ensure that they can buy the grocery, pay the utility bills, and literally keep a roof over their head in many cases. Their situation is one of my primary concerns in this legislation. Moreover, these unemployment benefits don't just help the jobless. They boost the entire economy as the unemployed spend their benefits at local businesses. Americans want us to focus on creating jobs and generating economic growth. Indeed, for much of the past 2 years, Democrats proposed many bills that would help middle-class families and small businesses, only to be thwarted or slowed by procedural roadblocks and sometimes disingenuous claims. We could not break filibusters last Saturday that would have passed the middle-class tax cut and also renewed unemployment benefits. And on several occasions over the past several months, we have had legislative initiatives for tax extenders that would have included key elements like a National Housing Trust Fund, key infrastructure incentives. Those too were thwarted by procedural roadblocks. But now we are faced with the specter of a tax increase on the middle class during this dispiriting economic time, if we do not act. Perhaps we could have avoided this situation. The Bush tax cuts, which I opposed, had an artificial termination point in order to fix them into the deficit projections. But again, we're here today at the last minute, and it appears that the only path that our Republican colleagues will accept is the one before us. Indeed, Republicans will not let this train leave the station unless the wealthiest hitched a ride too. The challenge we face is the need to sustain and accelerate growth so employment increases, while also recognizing the need to reduce the deficit once the economy is stable again. That is no small challenge. As a number of budget deficit commissions have suggested in recent weeks, we have to consider reform in Medicare, Social Security, defense funding, tax expenditures, investment in domestic programs, all of them to stabilize the deficit in the long term. I don't relish that task, and I don't imagine that America's families relish it either. However, this is a reality that we must confront as our economy improves. It's a reality that will be difficult. It's a reality that is a great challenge, but it's one we must face. Now, this bill includes some provisions that will provide economic growth. As I've mentioned before, the effect of unemployment insurance extension is not just on the individual recipients. It's estimated by nonpartisan experts that nearly $2 of economic activity is generated for each dollar in benefits. That is a very effective stimulus for the economy. The bill also includes a 2% cut in the payroll taxes paid by workers. And after local or state sales taxes, reductions in the payroll tax have the biggest impact on families living on the average wage. Again, this provision is estimated to create more economic activity than it costs, and it will, in essence, be the first raise that many workers have seen in several years. In addition, the proposal contains a host of other benefits for working and middle-class families. by extending the child tax credit for 10.5 million families and an extension of a partially refundable tax credit of up to $2,500 for the cost of college tuition. All of this economic activity means jobs and more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans. These are targeted, well-designed provisions worthy of support. Indeed, forecasters as well as economists like Mark Zandi have suggested that this bill will help maintain the fragile recovery and could lead to a 1-point drop in the unemployment rate and perhaps as much as 1% increase in GDP in 2011, as compared to previous baselines that took into account only the extension of the middle-class tax cut and expiring provisions like the alternate minimum tax. So there is, from experts, considered opinion that this will help grow the economy, reduce the unemployment rate, put people back to work. The bill also recognizes the need to build on the small business lending and tax credit bills we enacted this summer and fall. Indeed, the provision to allow businesses to expense 100% of all their investments in 2011 is expected to generate more than $50 billion in additional business investment next year. That's private companies investing in private enterprises to put people to work on private payrolls. The bill also encourages businesses to invest in future products by extending the research and development tax credit to keep us competitive in a very competitive world. The bill also recognizes the need for clean domestic energy by continuing the renewable energy production grants for wind, solar, geothermal, and a host of other technologies. And in this regard, the bill responsibly ensures that the tax rates in place for lower income and middle income families stay as they are today. It maintains the middle class tax cut. Indeed, the great bulk of the benefits of this bill will be directed to stimulating the economy and assisting middle income families. But in the face of this deficit, it is very difficult to justify the provisions of the bill for the wealthiest Americans because they provide negligible economic growth while adding to the deficit. In fact, working against the two great issues we must face, stimulate growth and begin to control the deficit. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and other experts, the decision to provide millionaires and billionaires with tax breaks won't generate many jobs because they are more apt to save these benefits than circulate them in the local economies throughout the United States, increase the demand for workers. In particular, the decision to insist on such an aggressive estate tax proposal is very difficult to justify. Instead of adopting a common-sense proposal that would have exempted well over 90% of all estates, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle demanded that the bill contain a tax break worth more than $25 billion over the next 2 years for the top 1/4 of 1%, 1/4 of 1% of all estates. I'm slightly heartened that these provisions are not permanent. While I would support an effort to remove or modify these provisions, at the very least in the future, they have to be the first on the list of those tough decisions we have to face in order to reduce the deficit. And we do have to address the deficit through tax reform, eliminating tax expenditures. There is a perception, I think, that tax cuts are free. As my colleague from Illinois suggested, failing to link the debt ceiling with this particular legislation could give the impression that we can cut taxes and there's no effect on deficit. These tax cuts do add to deficit. We have to recognize that. And when we come back to face the difficult issues, as we did in the 90s, I supported President Clinton's efforts, which led to a balanced budget, which led to a surplus, which led to employment gains. Those decisions involve revenue, cutting entitlements, cutting defense spending, making a lot of difficult choices. We'll have to face those choices again. We are at a point where the benefits of this bill are necessary to help struggling families throughout the country, to maintain the growth that we've seen, to accelerate it because it's not adequate. We have to move forward. I hope, Mr. President, that this package will pass. The reality is that the benefits will be received by 98.8% of Rhode Islanders, particularly the 65,000 who are out of work and would suffer without this bill. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.